Melbourne, Australia, 1947. A group of 14 men assemble on the dockside, ready to embark on an expedition to one of the most isolated and unknown places on Earth. These were the pioneers of ANARI, the Australian National Antarctic Research Expedition, sent to establish a permanent base on Heard Island, a new territory of Australia, deep in the stormy, cold reaches of the southern Indian Ocean. At that time, very little was known about Heard Island. The terrain, wildlife, and weather were mostly undocumented, and aside from secretive 19th century American sealers, the island had never known any long-term human visitors. Surrounded by the infamous Southern Ocean and the roughest seas anywhere in the world, Heard presented a challenge for anyone daring to approach its windswept shores. With its towering volcanic peak in the center, Heard greeted the crew on a rare and magnificently clear December morning. It was one of the best views they would ever have, for here was the wildest, windiest, and loneliest spot on Earth, deceptively peaceful in her welcome. The ship pulled in at an old sealer's anchorage called Atlas Cove on the island's northern shore, where the 14 men were then left alone for over a year, founding the Earth's most isolated human settlement. Here they built Australia's very first Antarctic regional base, from which they charted the country's newest possession and radioed back weather and scientific data from a previously unknown part of the world. But life at Heard Island was tough. Gale force winds were an almost daily occurrence, and destructive, violent cyclones would arrive with such force they were beyond measurement. Equipment, shelters, and even the aircraft were destroyed in just the first few days. And when winter arrived, it was nothing short of brutal. In the face of this unbelievable weather, and with newer bases now appearing on the Antarctic continent, Heard Island was abandoned in 1955, and the station fell silent. Visits became isolated and rare, and aside from scattered scientists and mountaineers, few would dare brave the voyage or the weather. Almost 50 years later, after countless storms and snows, an expedition went back down to Heard Island to explore a lost outpost and revive a long silent radio link from the edge of the world. January 3rd, 1997, Reunion Island, Indian Ocean. A well-suited name for the launching point of the latest Heard Island expedition. After 2.5 years of planning and one aborted attempt, the team is finally together again, larger and better organized. This is a multinational group of scientists, professionals, and more importantly, radio amateurs, representing 9 different cultures, each carefully chosen for their particular skill or contribution to the expedition. The ship contracted to take this team to the Antarctic is no stranger to the Southern Ocean. Named after the legendary French explorer Marion Dufresne's, she was built with the sole purpose of plying the monstrous seas once a month down to the French Antarctic and Austral territories. She is a tough, no-compromise ship, normally used by the French Polar Institute for scientific research and base resupply. This voyage, however, will include an extremely rare detour down to Heard Island. As far away from civilization as possible, the journey will take just over 6 days. Heard Island sits at the comparatively high latitude of 53 degrees south, but because it lies within cold Antarctic water currents, the climate is fully polar in nature, with temperatures rarely above freezing, and weather that is so bad nowhere else can even compare. Snapshots taken from above regularly show massive cyclones swirling in the vicinity of Heard. While the island safely lies far from any large cities, a storm of this magnitude would easily devastate any populated area. Almost every day, powerful Antarctic wind blasts over Heard's peaks, creating vortices of clouds and air, which then sweep down over the island in large gusts, and adding even more danger to an already unsafe place. A massive 9,000-foot active volcano makes up the center of the island. In 1985, another NASA photograph captured the eruption plume of Big Ben, just prior to a larger eruption that lasted until 1987. Two containers full of equipment were shipped from California several months prior to departure. And along with crates of food and supplies, everything is loaded onto the ship in one afternoon. 34 tons in all. Nothing is left out, as there will be no turning back and no place to buy spares once they are underway. Even though their stay will be only 3 weeks, a comfortable 3 months' worth of provisions are taken along just in case. For the ship, this month-long round-trip voyage to Heard and the French islands will require a bounty of food, not only for the voyage, but also for the expedition and base resupply. Luckily for the expeditioners, the start of the voyage will be a healthy one, as most of the tropical fresh produce from Reunion Island has to be consumed within 10 days of departure. Unlike previous expeditions to Heard that almost ended in disaster, this time nothing has been left to chance. For co-expedition leader Dr. Bob Schmieder, a physicist from California and a veteran expeditioner himself, figuring out how to camp 20 men and 34 tons of gear on a remote Antarctic island has been a year-long endeavor. January 5th, departure day. With a traditional dockside farewell party and a full load of cargo, the Marion de Friends makes a graceful departure out of Reunion's port, with the last item to arrive, a helicopter. As a key element of the expedition, this chopper will be used to transport all cargo and gear onto Heard Island, bypassing its rugged and notoriously dangerous beaches. The region of the Earth this ship will be sailing through is known as the Cyclone Alley of the Southern Ocean, with geographical latitudes nicknamed the Roaring Forties and the Furious Fifties. This precarious stretch of sea is one of the prime reasons why Heard also ranks as one of the world's least visited islands. During the voyage southward, mornings are spent in meetings, finalizing details, and hearing reports from each person's field of specialty. Afternoons are spent outside on deck, arranging the cargo for landing, and pre-assembling any expedition gear that's small enough to fly. But after days of heavy work and the lure of warm Indian Ocean breezes, many decide to take a rest, enjoying the subtropical sunshine and cruise ship comfort that will soon fade into a bone-chilling cold. By January 11th, ice starts to form on the railings and the weather changes dramatically. 6 days out of port and the ship has crossed into the Antarctic. Even though it is midsummer, the climate has changed overnight from subtropical to polar. With a heavy mist and water temperatures dropping close to freezing, the first signs of Antarctic bird life appear in the form of albatross and petrel, which happily trail the wake of the Marion de Friends. Outside, last-minute additions to the cargo are packed, and everything weighed once again. Inside, tent layout is reconfirmed, and everyone assigned a bunk. Now, there is nothing more to do except wait on the bridge and watch for any signs of the island. "8 p.m., January 11th. Heard Island is in sight, and the helicopter departs for one flight before dark. Officially, this is a reconnaissance trip to choose a campsite for the busy day that follows. But for the occupants of this helicopter, the feeling is more like that of an astronaut approaching an abandoned space station. Their first view of Heard Island is not pretty, as a freezing rain and the dark, crumbling remains of an old base are all that greet this team of four. The recon team is given exactly 15 minutes to look around. Just enough time to find a flat campsite, which will become home for the next 3 weeks. At 4:30 a.m. the next day, the ship is ready to stage an invasion in a maneuver that has been planned and rehearsed for months in advance. Every crate of cargo is prioritized in a landing sequence. A construction team goes first. Tools and shelter parts follow. Every effort is made to beat the weather, which is notorious on Heard for rapid changes. Even at this point, the pilot is fighting 40-mile-per-hour wind and heavy rain. But a snappy helicopter airlift was not an option in 1947, when everyone and everything had to be brought in by boat. In what took days of back-breaking work, the original 14 men, along with a ship's crew of 50, painstakingly ferried each item up the beach to a site not far from today's camp. With mostly hammer and nail, the construction was hard work, and eventually spread out over several weeks, lasting the entire summer. In what could be called the misdirected parcel of the century, these distinctive round shelters were originally meant for Alaska, but mistakenly sent to Australia during World War II. As they were designed for severe polar climate survival and had no practical use in Australia's hot deserts, they were drafted into the country's new Antarctic division for use at Heard Island. In the scattered expeditions after the Australian base was shut down, most either sought temporary shelter inside the remains of these buildings or slept on the ship that brought them to the island. Now, however, the original site is beyond occupation, and its derelict, tumble-down structures will no longer keep out the weather. Everything brought onto the island must be triple secured against the wind. No loose ropes, no untied ends. Statistically, the expedition can expect at least one cyclone topping 100 miles per hour 4 days of wind over 70 miles per hour, and only one calm, sunny day. The wind shows no mercy at Hurd, and precautions are taken to ensure that nothing blows away. As their campsite starts to take shape, an electrical power network is wired up throughout all tents and routed to a bank of portable generators which will operate continuously for the duration of the expedition. These will provide in total 37 kilowatts of power to the camp. And about the same time as the generators go online, so too does the beacon transmitter. This antenna will radiate a synchronized and repetitive signal on several radio bands, a message to the outside world that the expedition has arrived. With a farewell flight over the campsite, their helicopter returns to the ship, which will depart almost immediately, leaving the team alone and with no way off this rugged island for 3 weeks. Day 2, January 13th. The team is exhausted and sleeps well past sunrise, totally unaware that their tiny radio signal is being received worldwide. With the wind knocking the tents almost to a rhythm, the team is also unaware that their statistical one sunny day has just arrived. Big Ben, the towering 9,000-foot volcano that literally defines Hurd Island, bears its soul to the new arrivals in a sneaky early morning welcome. Hurd Island is essentially one large live volcano, with its snowy surface masking an angry and boiling mountain underneath, ready to explode at any time. Trailing off the slopes in all directions are majestic glaciers that grind their way slowly down to the sea. At the beachfront, massive glacial tunnels pour out cold, fresh water that swirls its way into the salty sea. While behind sits the rock and rubble mounds, the earthy deposits that are the glacier's terminal moraines. Days like this are extremely rare on Hurd, and the team uses the sunshine and warmer temperatures to finish the construction of operating sites and antennas. The expense and effort these ham radio expeditioners have put in just to activate Hurd Island is an indication of just how isolated it's been all these years. Representing one of the greatest challenges of the hobby, many ham radio operators have been waiting decades for a chance at contacting anyone based on Hurd Island. In the past, radio expeditions, or de-expeditions as they are called, have traditionally been small and compact, comprising only a few operators, and at the most 2 stations, making the hunt for a contact far more difficult. But this time, however, 7 stations, 20 operators, and over 30 antennas hope to not only make contacts easier, but also make the expedition an even greater experience through satellites, digital pictures, and internet access. With the last of the antennas rising into the air, a long, cold summer day comes to a close, and the expedition prepares for the impending deluge of radio signals that will greet them in the morning. Half a century ago, after the Australian flag was raised over Hurd Island, these men became the most isolated human beings on the planet. With the next ship due in 1 year and the next closest town over 2,500 miles away, Atlas Cove was truly at the far edge of civilization. The primary purpose of the base was mapping, meteorology, and cosmic science. Weather data was recorded daily and relayed to Commonwealth receiving stations in Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand, who were all keen on understanding just how Antarctic air currents created the Southern Ocean's legendary bad weather. Another purpose of the mission was animal research, such as keeping track of seal and bird populations and documenting the island's recovery from the 19th century slaughter. The Atlas Cove base was also used as a training ground for Australia's new station on the Antarctic continent. Not only for scientists, but for huskies too, who were bred and trained by specialists for their eventual working life on the snowy expanse of Antarctica. The psychology of Antarctic base survival was generally just getting started in those days, and the teams that came in and out of Heard Island were in many ways the guinea pigs for a new type of explorer and a new field of science. For most members of the Inari team, small party expeditions out onto Heard's coastline and glaciers were part of the job and were undertaken primarily for mapping the island and learning polar climate survival. These expeditions outside of camp were particularly dangerous because of the island's unpredictable weather. In 1952, tragedy struck a three-man team when the strong beach undertow swept one man out to sea. In an attempt to reach the base for help, a second man got lost on the glacier and froze to death. Later, the two would be laid to rest in the shadow of Big Ben on the northern side of the campsite. Perched high on an overgrown mossy hummock, the lonesome grave still stands today. A cemetery at the edge of the world for two fallen men, and a memorial to a forgotten base and all those who worked within its walls. It sounds like a cacophony of discordant musical notes, but to this operator, it's nothing less than a symphony. This is what the expedition came to accomplish as the call sign VK0IR resonates throughout the worldwide amateur radio community. Tens of thousands of stations all over the planet clamor on top of one another for a chance to make contact, however brief, with Heard Island. The most wanted and the rarest radio signal on the planet is alive on the airwaves once again, and it is bedlam. Picking out an individual signal from the crush of stations calling is a skill not easily mastered. But with the help of laptop computers and sophisticated receivers, retrieving a signal through the chaos is not as difficult as it sounds. But it's not all Morse code either.
Kilo 2, Kilo Whiskey 59. Kilo 2, Kilo Whiskey Portable 6, is that right? Thank you.
Voice communications, single sideband, is also in use at a separate dual station tent separated by about 1,000 feet from the Morse code site.
Fox Italy Delta 59.
India Delta, Echo Alpha, number 5, Foxtrot India Delta, 590.
USL Echo Alpha 5, Fox Italy Delta, thank you.
Every contact is logged in a database, which is sorted and analyzed daily by frequency and region, giving the expeditioners additional information about what parts of the world might be having difficulty getting through the massive stations. This expedition field analysis of contact data is a first for amateur radio. But another first is making this information available on the internet by means of amateur satellites. Once a day, all the contact data, news, email, and even digital pictures are uploaded by satellite to internet servers in the US and Europe. Now, anyone with access to the World Wide Web can share in the experience of an expedition. With the digital camera, the internet, and amateur radio, an expedition to Heard Island is now a visible reality for the rest of the world. Like an Old West ghost town rising out of the Arizona desert, the remains of the Inari site, like so many other abandoned bases in the Antarctic, is a decaying, rusting monument to science and discovery. The base is empty now, but certainly not quiet. Between the howl of the wind and the tapping of rotting wood against metal, the buildings give off an eerie echo of 50 years ago. In 1947, this was the edge of the world and the loneliest spot on Earth. After so many years of hurricane-force winds, snow, rain, and flying volcanic sand, today the buildings litter the campsite like empty shells, with their contents long since blown away, and their former occupants in another world. But even today, Heard Island still echoes with the names of the 14 men who built and first walked through these walls. Shoals Lagoon, Gotley Beach, Abbottsmith Glacier, Lambeth Bluff. A land survey of Heard was one of the mission's prime tasks, and now their names are immortalized on the maps they helped create. The site may look like a junkyard, but the artifacts and buildings at Atlas Cove are now designated as historical relics of Australia. Like tombstones in a churchyard, the manufacturer's inscriptions on many pieces are still legible and read like epitaphs for the base and its builders. At the camp's dispensary, unopened bottles of pain reliever and antique medicine sit exposed to the frigid wind, their contents decaying, and their expiration dates long since passed. Outside of the camp's power station, old diesel generators now lie rusting, lifeless and abandoned, too large to take back to Australia and too old to be of any use. Inside the same building is the camp workshop. Ghostly, fossil-like patterns are still visible on the walls, where tools once hung in neat, orderly rows. The black sand blown about by so many Antarctic storms now covers almost everything that was left behind. Those buildings not completely destroyed by the weather now house only those small items that once made everyday life a little more like home, and less like a lonely base on the road to nowhere. The ghost town that remains on Heard Island may have been abandoned by the Australians, but that doesn't mean it went unoccupied. Like vacationers at a beachside resort, southern elephant seals find that the tumble-down shelters make cozy places to relax during the warmer days. Behaving like carefree and sometimes inconsiderate tourists, the seals now inhabit most of the buildings, seemingly oblivious to the fact that they now slumber away in a hut that once was a major weather station for the southern hemisphere. But Heard wasn't always such a paradise for the elephant seal. The first recorded human sighting of this barren island was in 1853 by Captain John J. Heard, an American, who was sailing out of Boston in search of a faster Great Circle route to Australia. A few British captains unsuccessfully tried to claim credit for his discovery, but eventually ship's logs and newspaper reports proved Captain Heard to be first. This American discovery, however, would quickly prove to be a death sentence for much of the island's wildlife. Within 2 years, fleets of sealing ships from New England were swarming over the beaches. First to arrive on the scene was the Corinthian from New London, under the command of Captain Erasmus Darwin Rogers, who along with his crew became the first man ever to set foot on Heard Island. Rogers was from a large, God-fearing family of Connecticut seafarers whose reckless industry of slaughter was without regard to nature and barbaric by today's environmental standards. Predictably, the island's beaches and coves were first named for and by Captain Rogers. Places like Corinthian Bay and Cape Lawrence all descend from the names of his first group of ships and tenders. The 3 surviving maps of Heard drafted in the 19th century are all surprisingly accurate, complete right down to the location of storehouses and shipwrecks. So lucrative was the seal trade out of Heard Island that by the 1860s, Atlas Cove was actually a busy anchorage and an almost exclusive American territory. The rewards for such ventures were huge, but the risks were even greater. Within the first few years of discovery, there were 6 spectacular shipwrecks at Heard, all victims of the island's unrelenting storms. Sealing itself was a gruesome business, as slow-moving, defenseless animals were beaten and herded into rows before a rifle was fired down each throat. Skinned and stripped of fat, the blubber was then rendered down to oil in huge iron pots. Many of these sealers first camped and even spent the winter along Corinthian Beach, just to the east of Atlas Cove. Surviving like cavemen in primitive stone dugouts, they lived a miserable existence, where the smell of smoke, seal blubber, and penguin meat filled the air. Their pay for 3 years of this Stone Age life was the princely sum of $500. Not much evidence of their life is left anymore, save for a few rusty iron pots and some crude fireplaces that once incinerated gentle animals. These days, nobody knows just how many sealers came ashore, but their meager remains are unmistakable and offer fascinating clues and grim memories of the carnage. In 1948, the first Australian team, led by the base doctor, excavated one of these sites at Corinthian Beach and unearthed a grisly find. A skeleton buried in shallow sand with skull damage indicating death by a strong blow to the head. Many sealers were known to have gone insane from the bitter cold and extended isolation. And in those days, murder was a common solution to cure a colleague's mental illness. Over the course of 25 years, records show that 100,000 barrels of seal oil was exported from Heard, destined to fill the street lamps of New York or warm the houses of Boston. Whatever the use, the iron pots of Heard now lie rusting on the beach as a reminder to the days when this grim island was nothing more than a source of greed and profit. As the expedition progresses, the dark tempests of Heard begin to arrive with more force and regularity. Just keeping antennas in the air, or even in one piece, becomes more and more of a challenge. And with gusts up to 100 miles per hour, some antennas have to be repaired almost on a daily basis. Heard is a bleak and treeless landscape for good reason. Tall, thin structures like trees or antennas are just not fit to survive the brutality of its wind. But while the aluminum antennas luckily survive with only minor scratches and bends, a custom-designed fiberglass model did not. Structurally unfit to handle the massive wind force of a Heard Island storm, but electrically a superb performer, it took a team effort to keep this beauty in the air. Amateur radio enthusiasts hoping for a contact with Heard are much like astronomers seeking a new star or bird watchers awaiting a glimpse of a rare species. Like the return of a comet, Heard has been dormant and elusive for so long that the signals emanating from these antennas are becoming a global event for the more than 1 million radio amateurs of the world. Heard Island is most alive with animal activity during midsummer, when its beaches and coves are packed full of Antarctic birds and mammals, all enjoying the brief warmer weeks. Aside from the joys of summer, however, Heard's fauna is remarkably unique in that there are no human-introduced species on the entire island. This is a rare fringe benefit for the wildlife and an untainted dreamland for the zoologist. For the southern elephant seal, summer is when Heard turns into an island paradise. With the busy breeding season over by November, seals flock to Heard's beaches and tussock mounds to relax, molt, and soak up the warm weather. At these latitudes, winter is never far away, and in 6 weeks they will be back down near the continental shelf of Antarctica, looking for food and starting their annual breeding cycle once again. One of the most despicable birds in the world also calls Heard Island home in the summer, the skua. Strong, cunning, resourceful, and known as the meanest thing on webbed feet, the skua has absolutely no fear and is at ease even in the strongest of windstorms. They are primarily scavengers, but also enjoy attacking anything that's wounded or weak, including humans. And while the young wildlife at Heard's beaches may provide juicy hunting ground, the cool glacial runoff also makes a nice bath. Another frequent guest is the leopard seal. Short-tempered and extremely dangerous in the water, this solitary predator has been known to wander thousands of miles throughout the southern oceans. Though they feed mostly on harmless penguins, fish, and crustaceans, the sleek, hydrodynamic shape and razor-sharp teeth give this extraordinary seal a clear advantage out at sea. Heard Island also boasts a few of the rarest birds on Earth. One in particular is the beautiful Heard Island cormorant, with only about 100 breeding pairs known to exist on the island and its neighboring shoals. Another rare bird is the Heard Island sheathbill. Similar to a pigeon and a poor flyer, most relatives of this bird were wiped out from other subantarctic islands with the introduction of ship-borne predators, such as cats and rodents. Possibly due to the harsher Antarctic climate and the lack of shelter, city creatures like rats never got a foothold on Heard, and the sheathbill survived and now numbers close to 1,000. With its head held high and proud, the Antarctic icon and appropriately named king penguin is today a familiar sight on any Heard beach. But this was not so a century ago, when the sealers wiped the island clean of this beautiful bird. The king was a useful item to a sealer. Oil for fuel, skin for clothes, flesh and eggs for food. Easy to catch and kill and available year-round, they provided basic necessities to hold out an entire winter. And along with the seals, by 1900, the reckless killing of kings made it a rarity on herd. Looking much like its continental cousin, the emperor penguin, but slightly shorter, the king stands out as the best-dressed bird on the beach, with golden-orange neck feathers and a reddish beak. Curious, proud, and generally friendly, the king penguin prefers colonizing in flat and sandy areas and dislikes the rocky slopes and tussock mounds. Slightly smaller and far less regal in its looks is the gentoo penguin, which is found on most sub-Antarctic islands, including Heard. Happier on rougher terrain, the gentoo penguin can be found in large breeding colonies along the non-glaciated slopes and rocky shorelines of Heard. Unlike other penguins, gentoos breed twice a year and stake out their nests well in advance of each breeding season. Often, especially around the shoreline, these nests will be bulldozed by clumsy elephant seals who are completely unaware of anything fragile in their path. And for the Antarctic fur seal, a nice summer breeze and a snooze in the grass is something to be thankful for. These animals have spent up to half of the year at sea before returning to islands like Heard to relax and breed. They too have a sad story to tell, as both the Antarctic and subantarctic fur seal was ruthlessly hunted down by the millions for their skin, which brought huge profits to any ship discovering even a single beachful. The slaughter was efficient and complete, and so slow was the recovery that it wasn't until the 1960s when the first post-sealing pups were seen again. Up until 150 years ago, no human had even set foot on Heard's shores or seen its wildlife. Perhaps if man had not learned how to conquer the Southern Ocean, or science had not given them the tools to navigate such waters, the beaches might be less lonely than they are today. Despite the distance and the isolation, life for these expeditioners is made slightly more bearable than that of a Yankee sealer. Evening meals are prepared by a designated chef of the day, who has a varied array of food at his disposal, out of which to make the menu or dessert of his choice. After the expedition, every bit of non-perishable food that goes unused will be restocked in Reunion Island or delivered to one of the French bases. Dinner is the only guaranteed hot meal of the day, and usually the only time when most of the team is together to update each other on progress. In order to keep a modern expedition functioning smoothly for 3 weeks, notice boards inside the mess tent keep everyone informed about problems, rules, happenings, and work schedules. Unless there are volunteers, everyday tasks such as dishwashing, refueling generators, and latrine duty go round the camp in an equal spread. Evenings off the radio are spent writing email, swapping stories, or making calls home with Heard Island's first land-based satellite telephone booth, complete with a fax machine. Sleeping arrangements are cramped, with 2 12 by 24-foot tents holding 20 men and their belongings. But sleep is not a priority on this expedition, and many stay up all night, well past sunrise, in order to catch signals from the far reaches of the Earth. Bathing is not very practical in this climate, and only the very thick-skinned brave the frigid wind for a much-needed shower and shave. For most, personal hygiene takes a low priority for 3 weeks. But as predictable as the sunrise, the infamous Heard weather is never more than a day away, with sleet, snow, and rain taking turns at any given moment. Even more menacing is the killer wind, which angrily pounds the shelters night and day. For some, there's no place they'd rather be. But for others, the mind wanders to warmer latitudes. "80% of Heard Island is permanently covered in snow and ice. But in the few short weeks of summer, when the snow melts, the exposed, non-glaciated terrain could best be described as a moonscape. Looking at this desolate, treeless land, covered in layer upon layer of volcanic sand and rock, and exposed to fiercely cold winds, it's a wonder that sealers managed to survive here at all. Closer to the old base, a bizarre sight can be found in and amongst chunks of lava. Called Kerguelen cabbage, this prehistoric-looking plant is quite edible, and was an excellent source of vitamin C for sealers in their quest to prevent nutritionally deficient diets of the 19th century. Throughout Heard Island, there's also plenty of tussock grass and a soft carpety moss called azurella that grows rapidly in the short summer, covering just about everything within its reach. These mounds are of particular biological interest, and on this expedition, samples are collected that will later be sent back to Australia for further study and analysis. Zoologists are keen on learning more about a microscopic creature called a tardigrade, which inhabits the moss and has the unique ability to hibernate in a dehydrated state for hundreds of years. The undisturbed natural environment will be a key factor in understanding these creatures and determining just how they perform this miracle of nature. January 28th, Teardown Day. With a 60-mile-an-hour wind screaming in from the west, the team begins disassembling the stations. In just under 3 weeks, they have made over 80,000 contacts to every corner of the globe and broken all amateur radio expedition records to date. The Marion de Friends, the team's ride back home, is nearby and within local VHF communications range. They have been at sea for most of the month, supplying the southern French bases with materials and personnel, and have now returned to pick up the expeditioners and their gear. Most, if not all of these people, will probably never see Heard Island again. The distance, the expense, and the time taken is almost too much to do twice in a lifetime. With the last crate airlifted away, Heard Island is left as it was found, dark, cold, and empty. Heard Island is today an internationally recognized historic monument and a protected wilderness preserve of Australia. And while bases and expeditions may come and go, with their reminders of civilization left behind to rot in the sand, this beautifully resilient island fortress will never truly be conquered by man. The winds and the winters will make sure of that.